Welcome to the Culture, Faith, and Politics podcast. I'm Pat Kahnke, and I'm here again today with Dave Johnson. And we're continuing to talk through Tim Alberta's book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. And today we're talking about chapter 4, which is a lot about Russell Moore from the Southern Baptist Convention, but also just a lot about the Southern Baptist Convention itself. And it's another just really good chapter that's worth reading. I would recommend people read the chapter because we're going to be just talking about a couple of issues that jump out at us as worthy of discussion. But the chapter in its entirety is worth reading. So, Hi, Dave. How are you doing?
Pat. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
Enjoyed doing this with you.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this too. I'm learning a lot from you every time we talk, which is great. You know, it's
also scary. Like, wow.
Yeah, I think other people are too. You know, and it actually leads to comments that we get and questions, and I'm just really enjoying that. I'm enjoying the interactions with people who comment underneath our videos, and so that's great. Today, the topic that I wanted to start with is Russell Moore, because as I said at the end of the last video that we did, that today what's nice is that there's at least a character in the story right now that we can get behind, somebody who's one of my current heroes because of what he's been willing to sacrifice in order to speak the truth. And I think that if I were to put like a grand label over my thoughts about this book, this chapter, it would be they always kill the prophets, because he's just another example of when you dare to speak out in a sort of an abusive system, people don't like to hear it, and so we see some examples of that today.
Could I add to that just a little bit? As everybody has, people listening haven't read the book. Maybe they'll hopefully follow us after, but when you say they kill the prophets, Russell Moore was like this quintessential, he was
golden boy
through and through SBC. He was Southern Baptist Convention. He was a company man. Okay. Like I'm all in. I mean, he was the president of the executive ethics committee or something like that. And he was in line to become the president of Southern Baptist his whole life. He loved this denomination, these people. It was his tribe, his home, and
his identity.
And so when he began to see and want to talk about issues, not just of abuse, but that was horrific. 700 victims, 20 years of cover up, but also the original sin of the Southern Baptist Church is how they were really formed in their division between the North and the South over slavery, and the Southerns embraced slavery, and they just don't want to look at that possibility that when you call him a prophet, he was in that family, and so the price had. And I think he was actually stunned when he began to move toward what was the truth about people who were being abused sexually in the denomination and whatever else. I think he actually expected people to respond positively and go, oh man, you got to do that. And
thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Right.
Yeah.
But they didn't. And that's where he fits into that prophetic mold. And it also exposes a dangerously false system. Religious system.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
Pat,
exactly.
You told me to quit saying I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm not sorry.
Yeah. For people who don't know, the things that Dave, you'll hear him say many times, is he'll say something super helpful, maybe even profound, and then he'll say, I'm sorry. Or he'll say, blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah,
and
blah.
It's like,
blah, blah, blah.
And I love it. It's like, I'd miss it if you didn't say it. So, yeah.
Okay.
So this chapter starts with Russell Moore. It starts with Tim Alberta talking with him, and it tells a lot of his backstory, which I won't read all of that. But what I do want to say is like Dave was saying, he was the golden boy. He was this wonderkind, at the Southern Baptist Convention, and he was going places, and then found himself on the outs. not only because of his opposition to Donald Trump, but very much that played a role. It was his opposition in the early days to Donald Trump's candidacy along some of the moral issues, and uh, especially the thing that happened with the Access Hollywood tape, where Donald Trump was bragging about being able to sexually assault women, and when you're a star, they let you do it. And Russell Moore was just
Right.
appalled that evangelicals were not speaking out against that, but they were covering for him. And so he wrote some things, and he just found that his critiques of Donald Trump were not welcome, and but he didn't stop. He continued to speak the truth, I would say, about this sort of thing. And one of the things that I found, a principle that I've seen again and again, that keeps happening, is that uh, Christians quite often are allowing Donald Trump to decide who's in and who's out of the Christian camp. And I'm doing a different video
which is
on this.
which is it's just absurd
Yeah,
that that's
it's absurd. It's
and
absurd, but
some Christians. It is some
some
Christians, but
Christians. Yeah, right. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But I'm doing a separate video about this because somebody sent a question about, well, didn't Jesus say that he came to bring a sword, not peace? And just when you look at that passage, for instance, the whole point of that passage is Jesus is saying, by your choice to follow me, I you will put yourself in a position where there will be strife even within your own family, where father will be set against son and mother against daughter by your choice to follow me. And so he's metaphorically saying it brings a sword into the family. And what
which
I've
is what Russell Moore brought when he told the truth. It's not a
exactly
literal sword. It's not a literal
right.
sword. Yeah,
Exactly. And so by
right.
Russell Moore making the choice to follow Jesus in this moment, rather than the guy that everybody was excited was, this guy's going to be president and he's going to be on our side and stuff, so they were covering for him. When Russell Moore, because of his conscience, chose to speak out, and because he's following Jesus, it brought a sword, in the sense that now he was being attacked. He was, there, so division was happening. But what I think is so,
Well,
it's sad and funny, and sad and funny. I go back and forth between how I feel about it. Is when Donald Trump then decided to speak out against Russell Moore, and he tweeted that he's truly a terrible representative of the evangelicals, and he called him, quote, a nasty guy with no heart. And this is from the book. And I just think,
that's what
okay,
Trump said
like
about Russell
that's
Moore.
that's what Donald Trump said about Russell Moore. And like you said last time we spoke, Dave, it doesn't surprise me that Donald Trump would say that. What surprises me and what's heartbreaking is that so many Christians then threw Russell Moore out of the camp, because it's like Donald Trump has become, for those people, the one who brings the sword. If you choose Donald Trump, or not, that's where the strife comes from, within the family or within the church, within the institution, rather than it being about choosing Jesus. Looks like you have something to say about that.
Well, yeah, when Donald Trump calls Russell Moore a nasty guy and not a true
Right.
Christian or not a good Christian or whatever, that's
Bad
not just
representative. Yeah.
that's not just the pot calling the kettle black. That's a
Mm-hmm.
cliche. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's um it's what we talked about in our last episode. That's somebody who's pointing the finger. It's not here, it's there. He's the bad guy.
Right.
That's somebody who's winking the eye and is shifting the feet. And the fact that people can't spot how full of crap he is
Right.
profoundly discouraging to me. And
Right.
be, yeah, yeah, he's flipped the script. The other thing you said something about, like, the sword was brought on Russell Moore when he's told the truth. I was trying to say, actually, that I think when Russell Moore said, no, we have to talk about the 20-year cover-up of sexual abuse in the denomination, he was bringing a sword.
Yeah.
He was bringing a sword in a very healthy, I mean, Jesus said,
A healthy way.
I came
Yeah.
to bring a sword. I came to expose false religious systems. That's why he turned over the temples. He's not talking about a physical sword. You know, I want to say to people who go, Jesus, you know, get an education, like figure out what you're talking about before you talk. I'm really out of patience, Pat. I'm sorry.
No, it's easy to run out of patience. It's pretty easy on a YouTube channel to come and drop a Bible passage out of context and move on. And that was one that was dropped. But I do think it's important to talk about it and to address it, because
Well, I think it's important because I think that kind of stupid stuff needs to be called stupid.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. So, yeah, I know that like the whole story of Russell Moore is important in this chapter. And then he shows up later and I think a really hopeful way towards the end of the book also, where later on in the book, we'll hear about some things that he's doing to, like, currently, to try to support pastors who are trying to just preach truth. He's not being political. He's not, he's just trying to help pastors who want to ground their congregations in truth and to sort of create a bulwark against some of these attacks that are coming on the conscience of Christians. And so he's doing that currently. He's also at Christianity Today now. But I know that, Dave, a lot of this chapter prompted some thoughts on in your mind about just the Southern Baptist Convention. And I know that you've written a book on spiritual abuse before that we've mentioned, and I'm not painting the Southern Baptist Convention with a broad brush about that. I'd like to have you just sort of share some of the things that it prompted in your thinking, this chapter.
Yeah. I thank you for that little caveat too, because I don't want to just pick on the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, but that is what kind of came up in this chapter with Russell Moore and the price he paid for trying to speak the truth to power. But where it connected with the spiritual abuse issue that I wrote about, and it's kind of been in my DNA for 28 years, is when the disclosure was finally made. SBC, to their credit, invited in an independent investigation company or whatever they were, and they really did get to the bottom of things, and they exposed a lot of things. But one of the things that I remember reading was that there was incredible stonewalling when victims began to come forward, and there was vilifying of them, and anyone who was pushing or advocating that we make reform and really help these victims was paying a pretty high price. And one of the quotes that really caught my attention was a guy by the name of Augie Bodo. And he was the chief counsel of the Southern Baptist Convention's executive committee. And when these attempts to bring into the light what was being hidden for 20 years about sexual abuse, he called those attempts to bring into the light what had been hidden for 20 years. He called them a satanic scheme designed to distract us from our mission, which is to share the gospel. So if that doesn't, like, wow. Moore later, responding to that, said this. I feel his pain, because he's thinking, I've been a part of this Southern Baptist community. It's my family for all of these years, but we are actually a community, a denomination, and lots of people can identify with this, not from the SBC, from other denominations, where the troops would be mobilized if someone in our denomination, or like a church in our denomination, decided to call a woman a pastor, like if she was pastoring the children, instead of calling her the director of children's ministry, they would call her the pastor, the children's pastor. So the
Right.
troops in his tribe would be mobilized to exile a church like that, or exile a church that would have a woman preach on a Mother's Day sermon. So they would be
Mhm.
really careful about making sure we get rid of that, but would call rape and molestation that lasted for 20 years with 700 victims a distraction. What that's called,
Mm.
I'm getting worked up.
Right. Right.
It's called straining a gnat and swallowing a camel. Jesus talked about it in Matthew 23:14 in this very long list of characteristics he described and laid out. Read your Bible, read it, Matthew 23. And one of the characteristics is if you're wondering what you're looking at and you see somebody straining a gnat, stop right there. Straining a gnat, the Pharisees used to do that. A goblet of wine, there'd be a gnat in it, tiny little gnat. And so when they would drink their wine, to make sure they stayed pure, they would strain it literally through their teeth. Oh, and they found a gnat because the gnat would make them impure. Oh, I can't have a gnat. Okay, so I'm going to strain out the gnat of a woman preaching on Mother's Day, but I will swallow the camel
Mhm.
of rape and molestation for 20 years and call the people who want to bring that into the light uh, say part of a satanic scheme designed to keep us off the mission. You lost the mission long ago.
Right.
Anyway, I'm
Right.
preaching
No, that's
too much.
yeah, that's it. It is infuriating to hear it, to hear the story, and to know that this goes on, in a lot of places. And again, it's not just to single out the Southern Baptist Convention, but super powerful group. Uh, this needs to be paid attention to. And later on in the book, Tim Alberta does talk about some changes that have happened there too. So there are
There you go.
some promising things happening there too. So it's not that
Can I say
there's
one thing
no
too?
one there that cares. Yeah, yeah,
Right. Well, just to clarify, I have no desire to kind of pick on the SBC. I think these
right,
things need to be brought to light and said the way we're saying it, because I
right,
think we need to notice where it's happening closer to home, like in my
right,
church or in yours
right.
or in ours,
Exactly.
because what Jesus gave us in Matthew 23 was not like an expose on the SBC. It was
Right.
principles. When you see
Exactly.
people making little things big and big things little, don't wonder what you have. It's a sick religious system.
Hmm. So what do you think is the motivation then? Like, because you think about like the people who, for instance, were leading the SBC, or say in just a local church where you see this sort of thing. What's the motivation uh, for ignoring this sort of thing? I mean, what have
Well,
you
I think
seen?
it's pretty obvious actually, and I feel safer when I keep it in the biblical text and then move over to SBC and the local church as well.
Hmm.
But in Jesus' day, the religious system of the day was entirely preoccupied with polishing the outside of the cup and of the bowl. Remember that?
Right.
That was still Matthew
Hmm.
23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, who polish the outside of the cup and of the bowl, meaning you look great. You have all the right answers. You look really good on the outside, but inwardly you're full of robbery and self-indulgence. So I think the motivation, it's not even about a motivation. It's where it's coming from. It's coming from the
Hmm.
fact that internally, they're really not there to serve the kingdom of God or the king. They're really there to build their kingdom, our last episode.
Hmm.
And they're
Right.
really there to protect the investment of their institution. And it's one of the reasons the next generation doesn't trust institutions at all.
Right.
And I'm sad about that. I think it's sad
Right.
because God can use institutions that are willing to bend the knee and have some humility and shine the light. God, Pat, I'm going to go crazy here. God is light. 1 John 1:9. God is light. He is the
Hmm.
ultimate reality. And in him there is no darkness at all. The way I paraphrase that is God is light, and in him there is no bullshit at all. God will give
Right.
it to you straight. And if you say you walk in, if you say you have fellowship with the God who is the ultimate reality, but you walk in darkness. I used to think that meant that if you walk in sin, no, the darkness that people are walking in, that James is or John is talking about, are people who are hiding their sin, bobbing and weaving, pointing and winking. And if you're doing that, you lie about having fellowship with the God who is light, because you can't be in fellowship with the God who is light and pointing the finger, winking the eye, shifting the feet at the same time.
Right.
And so I think the motivation, I don't know if motivation is the right word, but where it springs from is something internal that has nothing to do with following God or honoring God or wanting to be part of the kingdom of God. It's about people building their own.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the, things that we've mentioned already in other videos here is just the power of tribalism. Tribalism is
Mm.
just, so Russell Moore talked about just how he was a Southern Baptist, like almost before he was a Christian. Not really, but I mean, just in terms of his self identity, like growing up, it's like, this is my tribe, these are my people. And I think it's really hard to go against your tribe. Like we talked about in the last episode here, the last chapter, it's hard when you see things going on in your tribe to first of all to admit it to yourself, to realize that I'm not crazy, this really is a problem. This, that can take a long time, and but then that's just the first part, is to even recognize it, but then to actually
Yeah.
step out and to try to speak into it. This is why I say sort of the phrase that's over all of this in my thinking is, they always kill the prophets. When you
Yeah.
speak against your tribe, you're putting yourself out there in a way that for whatever reason, uh, there aren't very many people who are willing to do that. And Russell Moore
No.
was one
But I
who
would
is
clarify
willing.
something with that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would clarify something with that. I don't think Russell Moore spoke against his tribe.
Mm.
In the context of being in his tribe, he tried to say, we need to tell the truth. I'm just using the abuse thing. We need to tell the
Yeah,
truth.
right,
And he
right,
was in a tribe that, much to his surprise and chagrin, didn't want to bring things into the light that had been hidden. And
yeah.
that's when I mean, I can feel in my gut what he must have gone through. Now, I have not
Mm.
suffered the way he has, because he's been this tribe. Richard Rohr refers to the. I see it as kind of a container. I think growing up in the SBC is a great thing. It's your
Mm.
container. I mean, I grew up
Mm.
in a Baptist General Conference, Bible Church, fundamentalistic, and I don't. There's a lot of things I don't think about. I don't think like anymore relative to fundamentalism. What a
Mm.
great container! It gave me
Mm.
some sense of who I was and what was right and what was wrong. Then you find out not everybody was there for the same reasons. So I don't think he ever uh, confronted he didn't go after the SBC. He went after the
Right,
truth. That's what got him in
right.
trouble. And that's a scary thing.
Yeah, and that's a good clarification, and it's the way that I see it is you're perceived as going against the tribe if you bring up things that people don't want to hear. That's what it is, and
Right.
that's what happened to me in when I started to talk about some of my concerns, and when I wrote my book in 2020. It's like people just they start people who don't know you start just assuming that you're out to destroy the tribe, and
Yeah.
it's like, no, I'm writing this out of concern for my people. And I think that's what Russell Moore dealt with, and I could really relate to his sort of surprise and shock at how he was not accepted and not understood, because I felt the same way, where I thought, well, if I just point some of these things out, well, of course then people will see this, and we'll have this conversation, and it's not the way it tends to go.
Right. I think actually he was shocked, but I think, especially at the beginning, I think it broke his heart.
Yeah.
I think it broke his heart, because he's thinking, these are my people. This is my tribe. This is worth fighting for. surely they're gonna want to move toward the light, what is real and true. And when they didn't, I think I honestly, I think it broke his heart. And at the end, when he finally, I think in the chapter, it even talks about his wife said, "Okay, honey, Russell, you can keep going, but I'm out. This is not my tribe anymore."
Yeah.
And I
She
think
said,
that's when,
I think the phrase was something like, if you are going to stay in the Southern Baptist Convention, then we're going to be a divided, not a divided house, but we're going
yeah, like
to
multi faith or something like that.
multi-faith. Yeah.
Something like
Multi-faith
that.
house. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And she had had enough. And there's another poignant moment where his son is with him at a big, one of the big meetings that they had where he was making an appeal. And afterwards his son said to him, Dad, why do we want to be part of this? And I think he loves the Southern Baptist Convention. That's the thing. He
yeah.
loved it. These were his people. And I don't think there was ever a point where he was trying to harm or destroy.
Right.
It was
One of
trying
the
to help.
What you just said reminds me of another thing in that chapter that I think
Mm.
is a thing that people have noticed sometimes in really unhealthy churches. Was that his son, Russell Moore's son, at one point asked his mom, Russell's wife, is Dad having an affair?
Oh,
What?
right.
And that was because for a very long time, when Russell was trying to bring these things into the light, there was a small group of people on this executive committee, really power people, who were hounding him and harassing him and bringing investigations and bringing things publicly that weren't true, and they couldn't prove it. They just would say these horrific things, like you hear from
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
And his son was going, "What? And is he having an affair?" And the point I wanted to make in that was, I've seen that in churches where you'll have a relatively small group of people
Hmm.
who have a lot of very intentional um, desire to hang on to their power, and they will intentionally attack anyone who they see as a threat, and usually the truth is a threat to their
Right.
power. And that's another thing I see. To me, it's like these big macro issues, SBC and Trumpism and all those things. Like, I can't solve that, but you see it in your home, you see it in your church. You can talk about it there. Maybe you can
Right.
confront it there. Don't wonder what you're looking at.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's where I want to end this conversation is bring it back to that, that every one of us is in several different systems, a family system, a church system, at work, whatever. And to me, you could look at this experience that Russell Moore had, and you could be deflated by it, and it could make you feel like, oh, I don't want to stick my neck out because look what happened to him. But for me, it's actually super encouraging. Every time I see one person make a courageous decision to try to speak truth into a situation where it's required, it's super encouraging to me. And
Yeah.
it's and we should not be surprised, that passage that I talked about where Jesus said, I come to bring a sword. When you follow me,
Right.
it will bring this strife and everything. We shouldn't be surprised. It's not fun to go through that, but Jesus said that would happen. He promised it would happen, and
You will be persecuted.
it's expected. It's an expected
Yep.
part of following Christ, and it's encouraging to me whenever I see somebody who actually does it and is willing to pay the
Yeah.
price.
Could I add my little saying? I don't know if you
Yeah,
want to close with this, but
yeah, sure.
you and I were talking before, and I have this thing, and it really fits into what Russell Moore did. But I've told pastors for years, and I've learned it myself, that if you say what God tells you to say and do what God tells you to do, and when something is hidden, you move to reveal it so God can heal it. If you do those really hard things that people are trying to hide, you will never lose your ministry, but you might lose your job.
Hmm.
Do you know the difference? Okay. because I've known lots of guys, and this is when I was more connected to a denomination, who really were the company men, and um, they kept their ministry. I mean, they kept their jobs, but
Right.
they had no ministry because they could never risk confronting that crap over there or that over there. They could never tell the truth, so they kept their job, but they had no prophetic edge ever. And
Right.
I would rather die than
Yeah.
that.
So
And
say
I
that
think they are
phrase
dying.
again. Yeah. Tell me that phrase
If
again because
you
I
if
think
you do
it's
what
so
God
true.
if you do what God tells you to do and say what God tells you to say, scary as it might be to do what God tells you or say what God tells you, you will never lose your ministry, but you might lose your job. Do you know the difference?
Well,
Because a lot of
amen to
people
that.
know the difference. Yeah, hang on to their
Yeah.
job, but they have no ministry. And they maybe don't even know they don't have a ministry because people are still coming to church, but they're beholden. They know who they can't tell the truth to.
Right.
You're so full of your.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's why this was an encouraging chapter to me because any time that I hear about somebody from history or current day, even who's willing to tell the truth in order to speak for truth and is not afraid of losing a job, it's encouraging. There's too few people like that, I think, in the world, and it's good to read about them and be encouraged by. So,
I think they are
well,
the
all right,
prophets.
yeah, right. So
I
thanks a
think they
lot,
are.
Dave. And
You bet.
yeah, we'll do this again in a few days, moving on to the next chapter. And I just really appreciate talking about this with you.